point about it being about Muslims, not necessarily about migrants. I agree with you on that. A couple of days ago, I was watching a YouTube interview where an American, he was over in the UK interviewing people in the aftermath of the riot, and I guess it was starting to dwindle down a little bit. And one of the people that they interviewed was Tommy Robinson. And the American journalist mentioned how the United States also has a migrant problem. And Tommy Robinson said, your migrant problem is not like ours, speaking to the American. So your migrant problem is not like ours. Ours is much worse because ours threatens to change our culture. After the massacre in New Zealand, a couple of years back, I think that was in 2019, I think. After that, many of the massages here have started having armed guards. You'll see now a lot more with submachine guns and AR-15s openly, just that show of force. And these are not high security. These are Muslims with their guns. But that's something that we've had to do. I think we should have done that earlier, but I'm glad we actually got the message.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Muslim Podcaster Show. I'm your host Majid, and today I'm joined by a special guest, Brother Muttaqi Ismail, the host of the Islamic History Podcast. Assalamu alaikum, bro, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Brother Majid. Glad to be here again, and we have a lot to cover.
We do. It's been a while since we've touched base, what's been happening?
Not much. As we know, there's been an attempted assassination on Donald Trump. He survived that. Joe Biden dropped out the presidential race. I believe the last time we spoke, we were discussing the college protests regarding Gaza. School's been out and only just started last week for many people, so that's been kind of under wraps by since then. I think the system has probably put in place policies to try and tamp that down a bit anyway. So we'll see how things go over the next couple of months or so. But this is probably a fairly boring time in the United States for now. Your country has all the action right now, so your country has all the excitement.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I recorded a podcast last week with Maulana Skandar, and he gave his take on the riots and all the discussion around British values and stuff like that. So I think it'll be good to discuss some of that here, but I don't really want to repeat in terms of what's been going on in terms of the riots and stuff. We will give it an intro and a little intro because you have to, I think, to be able to understand what's going on. But from your side in the US, obviously you're watching it through, I don't know whether you're going on, you get your news from YouTube or you get it from just the mainstream Fox News or whatever you watch over there. But how's it being reported? Because that would be interesting to know. What's the news on the ground there?
Well, I really don't watch mainstream news, so I don't CNN, Fox, or MSNBC. I really don't know. I would imagine that Fox is probably more anti-immigration, but I really don't know for certain because I really don't watch those channels. Most of my news I do get from social media, either through Twitter or X or whatever they're calling themselves these days, and from a little bit from Instagram, but probably primarily from YouTube. And I know the YouTube algorithm adjusts based according to your preferences. So I think I'm getting a mixture of probably some liberal-leaning stuff because much of what I'm getting is, of course, coming from Muslims and also liberal pro-immigration groups or news channels. I have tried to watch the other side because even though I may disagree with them on a basic level, I still would like to understand what is the gripe that people like Tommy Robinson or the EDL or folks like that have. I'll try to at least understand it from their perspective, even though I may disagree with it. I'd like to actually understand what they're discussing and try not to sound too ignorant about it if I have to talk about it. So from me personally, it seems really bizarre because this is not something I know. We know we have these immigration debates in most Western nations. The United States has the same debates, though they're slightly different here in the United States. But I've never seen, even in the United States, I can't remember riots like this. Maybe they have, but I can't remember them. But I can't remember riots where people were proactively attacking other groups of people, some of them who were actually truly, many of them who were actually truly British citizens. And it's something I never, well, I can imagine people attack Muslims because that has happened before. And I can imagine that minorities will be attacked. That happened before as well. But at such a scale where large mobs have to be separated by police officers from, it's just, I'm considering that the United States is somewhat the child of the UK, is just like seeing your parents fight, seeing your parents like really have a drag down knockout fist fight. Like, why are you two fighting? This makes no sense. And children is sitting there looking bewildered. But it is crazy looking. It is crazy. Have to ask. So I don't know what part of the UK you're in, but were there any in your area, and how are you and your family and your loved ones doing? How you guys make out during this period?
Yeah, I mean, where I am, I'm sort of like in the middle of the country. So
Mm,
there were planned demonstrations or protests, whatever you want to call it, um, but they never turned up basically. And I think
okay.
where we saw the most of it was in areas where um, it's predominantly English, white, and then you've got like a small Muslim community there, because then they're easy
Mm,
targets.
right.
So but nevertheless, look, the reality, brother Muttaqi, is the fact that you know it's one of those that I'm sure everyone was telling their loved ones, their daughters, their wives, their mothers, if there's no need, then don't leave the house. That did happen in the sense
Right.
that look, that because the issue here isn't so much to do with the riots. The issue here is to do with the fact that um, the mindset that's being pushed about Muslims. You know, you don't have to end up in a riot to feel the brunt of it. You could just be shopping. You could be
Mm,
just driving, and some lone wolf, a guy will just react. And these things have been happening all over the UK. And to be honest with you, since 9/11, the amount of Islamophobic attacks, if you want to call it that, have been on the rise. And since October the 7th, the same thing. So in terms of that, it's not really affected us too much. But I think the truth of the matter is that there's loads of angles about what happened. Um, and the first of all, I want to just make it clear is the fact that it's seen as protest, it's seen as someone will call it riots. Ultimately, to be honest with you, I think the main protest stroke riot was that first night in Southport, where the young girls were attacked and
right.
killed. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware of the backdrop of what actually
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. Mm,
Um, and since then, and this is what people are saying, after that, for days it went on, and ultimately it was a case of looting. A lot of it was just looting because you had people going out, breaking shops, stealing cookies and sausages and all sorts, right? And that doesn't really have anything to do with some little girls, you know,
mm,
being taken away from their parents ruthlessly, right? It's got nothing to do with that. But the main point I think is which is really important, which people don't really talk about, is the fact that this was something that was kind of waiting to happen, in the sense like, if for example you have for decades now demonized a certain community, demonized their thoughts, and you've made this demonization kind of mainstream, where in the past these things would have been seen like, well, you can't say that, but these things are now just discussed over the breakfast table or just at work, right? The issue to do with Sharia law, and last I heard a few days ago, the Shisha law, right? Yeah, because these people don't know what they're talking about. To do
mm,
with integration, to do with why Muslims like this, and they want this, and they want their own privilege, all of this, and then you check the tabloids and the news and the propaganda. So when you've had that for 20 years, and this isn't done by the guy who's stealing cookies from Greg's, or from, you know, stealing shoes from like shoes, and this is done at a governmental level, at a media level, right? So at the end of the day, all it needed was a spark, and
mm,
people try to make this out to do with race, like as a race riot. the reality is, the first place they went to was a mosque.
Yeah.
Right? And this you could say, you could argue, was linked to the fact that the false information that was sent out on social media by your Tommy Robinsons and your Nigel Farage and even Andrew Tate, brother Tate, right?
Mhm.
Um, said it was basically, he was a migrant, it was a Muslim. But what shows is the fact that even after a few days, when it was revealed that the guy was not a migrant, he was born in the UK, he was born in Wales, his parents are from Rwanda, he was Christian, actually practicing Christian, right? There wasn't any, oh, we got it wrong moment. The abuse continued because that was just an excuse anyway.
Right.
So I think that's the first thing. That's I'm not sure if it comes across on the news there, but it's very clear that this, okay, it's to do with immigration and stuff like that, but generally it's to do with Muslims and Muslim immigration, because even those people like your Tommy Robinsons, they've stated over the last few weeks, and even the week when the things were cracking off, they said we don't have a problem with Hindu migrants, Sikh migrants, Christians, Jews. We just don't want Muslim migrants. So it's very clear
Yeah.
who's being targeted.
Right. And that brings up, hopefully we have time to discuss this, but the strange turn of these, I don't know how else to put them, these red pill bros. And this is not just Andrew Tate, but this is a cadre of Muslims, or at least outwardly professing Muslims. And Andrew Tate is just one of them, who have embraced a form of, I don't know, I don't really want to call it white supremacy, more like, because none of them are white, by the way, they're all non-white, so it's not white supremacy, but more like a far right. And I think it's probably a branch off of the red pill, but also guy Myron Gaines, that's not his real name, from Fresh and Fit. He's one of them. Sneeko has dipped his toe into it as well. Those are the three main ones, of course, Andrew Tate. And this is a strange turn of these guys. And that's something I do want to hopefully we can cover, because that's and it's not something I really expected to come out of all this. But one thing I want to go back to your point about it being about Muslims, not necessarily about migrants. I agree with you on that. A couple of days ago, I was watching a YouTube interview where an American YouTube host, it wasn't a small channel, but it was some guy. He was over in the UK interviewing people in the aftermath of the riot, and I guess it was starting to dwindle down a little bit. And one of the people that he interviewed was Tommy Robinson, and the American journalist, he's really a YouTuber, but the American YouTuber journalist, he mentioned how the United States also has a migrant problem. And Tommy Robinson said, your migrant problem is not like ours, speaking to the American. So your migrant problem is not like ours. Ours is much worse because ours threatens to change our culture. And obviously we understand that for the United States, most of our migrants come from south of the border, Central America and South America. And even though they may not be white per se, they are Christian, or predominantly Roman Catholics specifically. There may be some people from the Caribbean and things like that as well, but they're still predominantly Christian, or within the Christian sphere. Whereas, he also, based upon the term that Andrew Tate used when he was in the car, when he mentioned that video of him in the car, where he mentioned the word, I don't know if this is as insulting to you as the N-word is to me, but he used the word Paki. And that is 99% of Pakistanis are Muslim. So that he didn't say Indian or even Bengali, even though most Bengalis are Muslim as well. He said Paki, and that is obviously just another word for Muslims or Muslims from the Indian subcontinent. So I knew from then that it was primarily based around that the argument was not, or the disagreement was not necessarily with immigration per se, not right now at least. It may go on to that at some point, but it was specifically about Muslims. And the EDL and Tommy Robinson has always been sort of like that anyway, from what I can understand, which is why I'm always a little hesitant about getting too chummy with these anti-Israel guys. Some of them are against Israel's policies and do speak out against Israel's policies, but I wonder how much of that is simply because they just happen to hate Jews more than they hate Muslims. And right now we make a convenient ally. So I don't know how much of that is really based upon actual genuine care for the Muslims of Gaza or the people or the Palestinians in general, Muslim or otherwise, or if it's just that, well, we'll use you for now, and then once we get rid of these guys, and we'll turn our focus on you. So I'm always a little reluctant about getting too chummy with those guys. But that also brings us back to the whole I mentioned earlier, the red pill bros, and I don't know what else to call these guys, but it all stems from the manosphere and the red pill, which has some benefits. It has some beneficial qualities in the fact of it's trying to push against the feminist narrative that much of the West is trying to give us. It pushes against deviant sexual behavior. It pushes against many things and pushes for masculine. But then, as anything that's not from Islam, it tends to go astray and turns into something ugly. And from that push against the mainstream narrative of feminism and deviant sexual practices and things like that, from that comes a push against anything that's not Western. And what's not Western? People who are not white and Muslims in general, even specifically Muslims, because you can, as we've seen, they're pretty much okay with, they can deal with non-white Christians, but Muslims of any hue is a problem, as we've seen in Bosnia and even in Albania to a certain extent. So yeah, that is something I found really strange, this weird turn of the red pill bros. It's not a good look at all.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the red pill bros, I'll start using that term as well now. Definitely, we can touch up about them because with Andrew Tate, I mean, linked directly to what we're speaking about in terms of the trouble that started. This guy, that's that infamous rant in his car. You know, there was a misinformation. What he was saying was not true, simply not true. Um, and later on, he there shows many clips where he was, saying "Paki this," and he was even saying the N word. Then, basically he posted a picture on Twitter of like this migrant on a boat with a big
Yeah,
machete,
I
and
saw that. Yeah,
your typical guy from Wales. So the thing is, we need to be very wary of people, and here is not issue of saying or who's a Muslim, who's not a Muslim. It's just the fact that we can't just jump on the bandwagon of someone because they say something which we kind of agree with, right? I mean, we'll come back to Andrew Tate because he's had a lot of backlash from, you must
yeah,
have seen on social media, like most of the main like sort of like dawa guys on social media have called him out, and I think he's tried to backtrack a little, but it's hard to from what he was saying. But I mean, ultimately, what he was feeding into was this feeling that you know the people on the ground, what supposedly they're feeling, even though all this stuff about migration, about the immigrants are doing this and the numbers and the percentages, it's all, these things have been fact checked, and it's all a lie. In fact, people will tell you that you take out the immigrants from the UK, for example, is going to be a pretty bland place, and not just bland, it will come to a halt. It won't function, right? So
yeah,
what you've actually got is, you've got, really, to be honest with you, you've got people who have some grievances, they have some hatred, or and a lot of this did happen actually in like the north part or northern England. So what you've
mhm,
got is, you've got southern England, which is your London and that area, which is very affluent. Then the further north you go, it starts
yeah,
getting deprived, a bit like Detroit. And I've seen videos of Detroit and stuff.
yeah,
So you got a lot of these people who, they haven't got much of a future. They're just taking their money off the government. They're not working. Most of the money spent on drugs and alcohol and stuff like this, right? So they all, they've got a gripe against someone anyway, right? They just want to blame everyone, an immigrant's taking their job, and at the same time they complain that immigrants are not working. It doesn't even make sense. They don't even think about what they're talking about. So what you've got is, you've got this feeling, and you've got people who are playing it, and the far right. What I've noticed, and I think this is an important point, brother Muttaqi, is that what's been very clear is how all the mainstream news channels have been saying that the way these guys are going about it is obviously wrong. You can't attack police, you can't do rioting and stuff like that. But then in the same breath, they're saying, however, they have genuine grievances, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their genuine grievances are actually not even genuine because they're factually incorrect. But what you see here is you see where this anti-immigrant, anti-immigration, anti-Muslim sentiment is kind of being brought into the mainstream, where what they're doing is like ideas that normally you would say are far right, right? They're saying actually they're not far right because normal people have these because they're genuine grievances that people have. So they, about hotels being used for migrants and so on and for asylum seekers and so on, right? And then you've got even the political parties who are then using this whole scenario. So, for example, the government, which is the Labour government, which won the elections, is using this to show Muslims that actually some of these grievances are genuine. So, you need to make some changes, right? Like it's a tactic which is kind of like pushing them to say, well, look, you need to make some changes. You need to reform some of your beliefs. Some certain beliefs don't actually, we can't accept them in the UK anymore. They go against British values, right? And then you got the
Mm-hmm.
Conservatives, the Tories on the other side, who in the last election, they had like, I think it was their biggest loss, right?
Right.
Who are now using this same far right sentiment and actually bringing these people in to shore up their own support base, right? So you got the politicians who are using this sentiment on the ground as well. So ultimately, these people are being used as pawns. And if you've been watching any of the news recently, these people are being getting sentences. I was speaking to a brother today. Like you got people who are just a normal guy, normal professional. He went crazy on that day, and now he's in prison for 3 years. Right? You had
Mm-hmm.
one woman who was posting on Facebook, go and blow up the mosques with the Muslims in it. She got I don't know. I think she got 18 months or something like this. But the point is there are people out there who just fell into the hype. They have this hatred inside of them, and ultimately they've gone out and they've done wild things. But now they're paying the price. But the government's still in place, the politicians are still in place, right? Divide and rule type of thing. If you look at it, Muslims contribute to the economy, Muslims generally contribute to society anyway, right? If you're going to look at it from a material point of view,
Right.
but they don't want you to see that. So it's really important to understand that this is definitely being used by the far right. And one last thing, which I want to get your take on as well, is how the Zionist poodle, Tommy Robinson, which is a fact. This guy is an
Yeah.
open Zionist. He's on their payroll. He's their
I've heard those
tool,
folks.
right?
Yeah.
He pushed this, and when this was happening, brother Muttaqi, I thought to myself, when the pro-Palestinian marches were happening,
Mm-hmm.
these governments were burning from inside, but because of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, they couldn't do anything about it, right? And at the same time, the Zionist entity, all these demonstrate these hundreds of thousands, millions of people coming out, right, speaking against it. It obviously wasn't in his interest, right? They're not winning the PR game.
Right.
Now I'm thinking, it'll be good to get your view on this. That maybe through something like this, they bring in some new type of laws and stuff like this, where it would be more difficult now for protesters to go out, um, for whatever, whether it's pro-Palestine or whether it's anything anti-government, where now they have stronger measures in place to stop these people from expressing themselves.
Right. Yeah, I can see a law being passed, maybe in some parts of the United States, but well, it hasn't happened. We haven't had the riots or protests that you guys had, but I can see a law being passed that prohibits prohibits demonstrations that target a group of people, that target a specific group of people. Anything that is.
You know what? Just on that point, I like that point you made there, because one thing they've made very clear is that
Yeah.
like this is from the government point of view, that these
Hmm.
riots were targeting a certain people,
Right.
right? So if you're not if you're not extend that to any other people, like we know who we're talking about,
Mhm.
same thing.
Right, right. And even though the Palestinian demonstrations were not against any group of people, it was against foreign governments' policies, and it's a wartime is you want to call it wartime policies. That's what it was against. Nothing to do with any because there are many Jewish people who actually are against Israel's policy. So it's not against any we should be against any policy and demonstration that specifically targets Jewish people. That's not Islamic. However, something that is against the nation state of Israel, especially something that Israel does that harms people, and especially something that harms Muslim people, then yeah, we should speak out against that. And so we do have to walk that fine line of making sure we don't fall into being anti-Jewish or anything like that when we're speaking out against. And that's when it goes back to the red pill guys, and also to our temporary alliance, I guess, with the far right movement. Though I think that alliance has pretty much been shattered now. So that temporary alliance where they just happen to dislike Jews more than they dislike Muslims, at least some of them do. And so, but yeah,
You, you you're thinking of someone like Nick Fuentes,
I don't really listen. I know who Nick Fuentes is. I don't
because
really listen to him.
he's basically
Yeah,
anti-Jewish.
yeah, he
And I
definitely
think
is.
Andrew Tate was tweeting his stuff.
Yeah, he has been on Nick Fuentes is also anti-black. That's what you may remember my Instagram post that I put up a couple of months ago with that. I'll explain. I know you wanted me to explain. We never got around to it, and I think you may have froze. I don't know. So you still
No,
there,
no, I'm
bro?
not frozen. I'm here.
Okay, you're staying very still.
That's my thinking pose.
Okay, okay. So um, a couple of months ago, you notice I put a Instagram post calling out Andrew Tate and also Sneeko too, for both. Right, that came out in June. It was in. Do you are familiar with Juneteenth? I don't want to tell you if you already know what it is. Juneteenth, the
No, because I remember, to be honest with you, I can't remember what they had done, what
okay,
you had actually, you said we'll discuss this when
right,
we,
right. We never got
yeah. So
around.
I'm
I went
not
on
really sure
vacation.
why you called them out.
Okay, all right. I'll explain. I'll explain it now because I went on vacation after that, and then everything kind of fell apart. Okay, so Juneteenth is June 19th. It's a combination of the words June and 19. Juneteenth is celebration of is generally speaking, it celebrates the emancipation of slaves in the United States, but not quite though. More detailed explanation is that after the Civil War ended in the United States, most of the slaves in the southern states were freed. However, slaves in Texas found out a little bit later than the other slaves. They found out on June 19th, and that's when they started celebrating their emancipation. So for the longest time, Juneteenth was really only a holiday, or really only celebrated by Blacks in Texas primarily. It really wasn't a nationwide holiday. I first heard about Juneteenth in college when I went to school in Florida, which is a former Confederate state. I heard about it from other students who were coming from Texas. That's when I first heard about Juneteenth. And my family's from the South, but I never heard about it until then. And I'm a descendant of American slaves myself, but I never heard about it until I got to college. But since then, though, with social media and everything, social media and stuff, it became more and more popular. And after the George Floyd riots of 2020, to appease its Black folks, the government made Juneteenth a national holiday, but it wasn't always a national holiday. And so it still isn't adopted by all people because it's a fairly new holiday. And there's also we have our own racists here who don't like it. Either they don't like a paid day off. Even they don't like anything with Black people, even if it's a paid day off. Even if they get paid to stay at home, they still got reason to complain. Now, Andrew Tate is half Black. He's half Black. His father's Black American. His mother's British, I believe. But he was primarily raised in the UK. So that's why to me, he has an accent to me. Maybe not to you, but to me, he has an accent. So um, he he somewhat believes he has license to use the N-word because of his Black father, who I don't believe I don't know, maybe he knows him or not. I'm not even sure if he had any sort of relationship with his father or not, but that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is he believes he has license to use the N-word. And on top of all, on this past June, he made a quote, he wrote a tweet stating that Juneteenth is a ratchet holiday. Ratchet is a term for uncouth, ghetto, uncivilized, low class, things like it's usually it's a term that it started in the Black community, but it's spread out throughout many younger Americans now. So when you see somebody acting crazy, acting wild, you say, why are you acting so ratchet? Or someone, we have lots of terms for people who who act a little bit below accepted social norms, dusty or ratchet, ghetto, things like that. All those terms that basically mean someone who's not acting according to social norms. That's probably a very nice way of putting it. But anyway, he called it a ratchet holiday. And, I've seen other quotes of him where he's using the N-word improperly. And it's obviously he's doing that um, to call out to his mostly his white supremacist fan base. So all of his fans who are white are not going to feel the same way. But his white supremacist fan base, he was calling out to them, and he's been on that road a lot. And he really made it. He really did it up, and he's fairly popular, and a lot of fairly popular Black YouTubers, not Muslim, they called him out on that. Sneeko, though, has not been as bad, but he has also done much of the same. I can't recall.
But one quick thing in terms of why did he say why did he call it that
I
anyway?
don't know. He's in Romania.
So he never came out to explain.
He was just on a random rant and wanted to just try to be funny. He often couches as he's trying to be funny. He's just making a joke. And so maybe that was just one of his jokes, but I don't know. But it's one of those things where it's like he's in Romania. He didn't really grow up around Black people. He's not part of, even though his father might have been part of the culture, he's not really part of the culture. It doesn't affect him one way or the other. June 19th has no impact on anybody outside the United States. He does not lose a dime from it. It doesn't hurt him. But he's saying that obviously to appease a certain portion of his fan base. There's no practical reason for him to say something like that. They could say he's trying to be funny, whatever. But he got called out by a lot of non-Black YouTubers here in the United States. I'm sorry, Black YouTubers who are not Muslim, non-Muslim Black YouTubers here who have large fan bases called him out on that, and he hasn't necessarily stopped. He has gone on to say other things beyond that. Sneeko has also said certain things. He's also, I think he's half Filipino, half Haitian, something along those lines. Though he has not been as bad as Andrew Tate, he has not been as prolific with it, but still, as a Muslim, you really shouldn't be dealing with those sort of things. Why are you calling out a whole group of people who have done nothing to you? I mean, and another thing, and if you follow, there's many people tend to link degeneracy in the United States, specifically with Black people and Black culture, as if 14% of the population is responsible for 90% of the degenerate behavior. And I believe that's often because of popularity of rap music, and hip hop culture is very popular, and that did originate with Black people. But most of the money is not made by people in the Black community. We have a few stars who make a good deal of money, but the money is especially the degenerate parts of that culture. Without arguing about whether, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I'll try to bring it back in a moment. Without arguing about whether music is halal or haram, all rap music is not necessarily degenerate. If you believe music is haram, that's one thing. But all rap music is not necessarily talking about bad things,
Sure.
cursing and gang warfare. Is for many, there's a period of time, and even still now is, and even to a certain extent, even with the current beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, is used to call out injustices in society sometimes. It has often been used to call out injustices in society and things like that. Though, of course, the degenerate parts of it, the part that alludes to lowbrow behavior, is the one that's promoted the most, and so it is seen as the most popular form. But that's not necessarily all rap music. But nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that many people connect the degeneracy that is in the United States. They tend to place all that on particularly rap music, and from there on to Black people. They did in the past with rock music, and from that is also on to Black people. So they separated rock and R&B to make it clear one is for white, one is for Blacks. That's another story. But the point of the matter is that, and I believe I don't want to misquote Sneeko because I'll give him credit that he has tended to back off some of it. but he made a statement stating that Black culture is degenerate. He's made a statement. I'm maybe misquoting, but it's not a far misquote, saying that Black culture is a degenerate culture, something along those lines. And coming from somebody who's not really Black, Black American, that's I don't know where he gets the license to say something like that. So that was some time ago. Hopefully he has changed since then, but Allah knows best. And don't even talk about Myron Gaines. He is just, even despite his recent debate they hosted between Daniel Hakikachu and Sam Shamoun a couple of days ago. Despite that, the Fresh and Fit boys have said some really crazy stuff also, but that's another story.
The thing is with the Myron Gaines, from what I saw recently was, I don't know if it's happened, but he was going to do a show with Tommy Robinson.
Yeah.
And I think a few people on the Dawah scene who know him contacted him because he's a Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, "No, I can, basically, I'll get anyone on that I want." And he went on a bit of a rant. But but the thing is, brother Muttaqi, is like, these people, uh, just because they're Muslim, I think ultimately what it boils down to is, what is their mindset in the sense, like what they see as
Yeah.
good and bad. If for them it's about profit, and if you're in the social media game, it's about clicks and it's about views, then basically you're gonna try getting on there. You'll say those crazy things like like you said, Andrew Tate has been saying. There was another video shared where he was blatantly saying things which are, like, he's using Paki and he was using other words when I don't know how he feels so comfortable to
Yeah.
say that. Probably because he feels like he's got so many supporters and or he's Muslim now and he can say it. But the point is, I think, a lot of these people, their framework isn't Islam. For them, if your framework is Islam and you're going to stand for truth and justice. Now, you've got someone who, like Tommy Robinson, who blatantly attacks Islam, who blatantly insults our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, blatantly attacks the Quran, right? Now, if you are coming from an Islamic point of view, bro, you wouldn't give someone like that the time of day. Like, why would you even like think, oh, well, yeah, some of his views are, okay, and why are you doing that? Why have you got one foot in and one foot out? You gotta have both feet in, and that's
Mm-hmm.
the point. And I think that's where, probably links to the point you're making, is a lot of these people, they are just doing it for their own benefit, and the reality is they're feeding into the stereotype. So black culture, like, comments about the crime, and black culture is what contributes to the degenerate activities in America. The same thing is said about immigrants. So now,
Yeah.
if there's a knife attack, then people will say, "Oh, these immigrants, stop the boats," as if as if before the migrants came to the UK, to Britain, that there was no crime. The British are the biggest criminals the world has known. Come on,
Mm-hmm.
brother Mutaki, you're Mr. History here. These guys, the guys who are looting Greg's and Shoe Zone and O2 mobile shop are only following in the footsteps of their predecessors, but on a very small scale. Their
Right.
predecessors were looting entire nations and wiping out the
Mm-hmm.
people, indigenous people of the land. So, you know, it's all just lies that the immigrants are like this and they bring crime, and and when you have Muslims, your fellow Muslims, who have some clout, who have following, actually reinforcing those stereotypes, you know to be honest with you, it's led to some to say that, I don't think these people are Muslims. I mean, there's other video of Andrew Tate, as we're on that topic,
Yeah.
talking about, Jesus is the Lord and all this other stuff. Like, so even
I've heard that.
forget all this stuff, the stuff that the brother said, but then you think, you know what, you still make excuses, but then when you're actively, making alliances with people who are against Islam, actively, saying that they have some genuine issues, or I can understand the white man's plight, and it's very easy for him to play this black card and then he plays the white card as well, just because he's mixed race. It doesn't make sense, right? So I think we should expect better. I think
Yeah.
they can do much more with their voice by showing that, no, these statistics about immigrants doing this and they're causing these troubles, and this is not true. In fact, most of the doctors are immigrants. Most of the nurses are immigrants. If the migrants left the UK, or I would say any Western nation, they will struggle, and mainly down to the fact that they have an aging demographic. They need this workforce. But one thing I want to pose to you, Brother Muttaqi, and then I think we're going in and out of topics anyway, but then we can speak more about the red pill boys. Is America's a bit different here in the sense, like you would say America has been built on. I don't think they say this with any shame, but America has been built by migrants, because whether it's the Irish, whether it's the English, whether it's obviously the black community never had a choice to go there. Nevertheless, the Chinese even, and right. So it's difficult to say immigrants out or stop the boats, even though they say that about the Mexicans and the South Americans. But you think, wait a minute, you guys are all migrants, for whether it's economic migrants or for whatever reason. Why stop giving opportunities to other people? Nevertheless, but one thing that I've been having discussions with a lot of Muslims recently is where people have been saying to me and weighing up that um, even the Hamza Yusuf, Hamza Yusuf, he was the not the scholar.
Oh, okay.
No. This guy was he was the equivalent of like the Prime Minister of Scotland. But obviously, Scotland's not a separate country, right?
I heard of him. Yeah.
And basically, he had family in Gaza and stuff. When all the Gaza stuff was going on. Anyway, he came out and he said, when I was young, my dad said to me, son, one day is gonna come when they're gonna kick you out, right? So make sure you got somewhere to go, right? And he says, I'm thinking about these words now, and I don't know where my future lies. Now, here's someone who has probably been at, in Scottish politics, he's been at the top of the pyramid. So a lot of people have been asking the question, saying, as Muslims, do we belong in the West, or as immigrants, do we belong in the West, right? And I think many people are now looking east. And this doesn't mean that they're gonna leave tomorrow. I think it's just that in the mindset starting to trigger now. Like our long-term future isn't here. I think with the statistics that are coming out, even though not everyone has these views. I mean, there's some tremendous English people here. However, if you look at the statistics, it shows that social media, the politicians have been very successful in making the mindset about immigrants and Muslims in particular a negative one. They've been very successful in that. So the question people have been asking whether it's time for Muslims to look east. However, in America, I don't think you'd even have that conversation, because supposedly it's when people talk about let's make Britain great again, what they mean is looking around, all you see is white faces. But that's never really the case in the US, because it's never been like that in the first place, right?
Right. When people say MAGA or Make America Great Again, they generally speaking of the 1950s, just after World War II, where the United States was one of the few Western nations that was relatively untouched. And so for about next 20 years or so, next 20, 30 years, the United States dominated the world economically, which carried on over. And we're still feeling the effects of it today, though, that domination is wearing off quickly now. But the United States was the top because it was the last country standing after World War II, and most of the Western world was annihilated or heavily demolished. But and during the 1950s, of course, segregation was still legal in definitely all the southern states, and it was de facto segregation in much of these northern states. And the civil rights movement was just getting started during that time. But that's what they mean, that magical period of time, or so-called magical period of time, in the 1950s, when America was supposedly this utopia. It was not. There were things that are better then that are now. Some things are worse than that are better now. It's just this life has changed. The United States is not really. It is still militarily the most powerful country. It still has a higher GDP. We can probably absorb more migrants than individual European countries can. I think all of Europe can probably absorb a lot more. But individual European countries, I can see the I can see how propaganda would affect them, because it's got the UK out of Brexit, which I think was part of the problem as well. I think people expected leaving Brexit to magically resolve everything when that didn't fix anything, and actually probably made things worse.
Oh, it did.
One of the things I want to ask you is that this is something I've heard. You can correct me if it's wrong, but I've heard that within the UK, really, and you kind of alluded to it, but you mentioned southern um, Britain. I'm not sure I'm not good in your geography, but London is like basically a first world country. London and its environs are pretty much still a rich nation, but the rest of it is pretty much not so great. And I've seen some really depressing videos of, I forgot what it's a part of the UK that used to have a vibrant boardwalk and beach scene. And when the EU was created and migration between states became much easier, or between nations became much easier in Europe, wealthy Britons you now stop going to those places in the UK by the beach and start going to Spain and Portugal and warmer places instead. And it was very depressing seeing those cities that had all these shut down carnivals and boardwalks. It was like, ugh, it was absolutely horrible. Um, I'm wanting to ask you, is that really, would you, is that assessment true where London and its environs are pretty much still the wealthy country and the rest
I,
of the country is kind of struggling?
I would argue that if you were to take London out of the UK, the
Mm,
UK would not be a first world country. Um,
okay.
you got to remember, the Britain doesn't really export anything. It's from what I remember, is London was like the financial services, um, capital of the world. I'm not sure. Brexit might even have affected that, so I'm not entirely sure. However, it's more to do with services and especially financial services, right?
Mm,
So the mines have closed and the steel market, I don't think is it was good at one point. So what you've got is you've got a massive disparity, and this is the point that if the immigrants or people of color left the UK, right? They would turn on each other because that's just how it would work. Because there's definitely
mm,
what they call the North and the South divide, and North is generally seen as there's a lot of poverty, bro. Trust me that where you have not far from my house, I would say it takes about 60 seconds. There is a food bank, right? And there's a
mhm,
food bank where you have nurses, you have professionals who have to come to food banks in order to make sure they have enough in their fridge, right? And when I see that, and I think, bloody hell, when people back home in Pakistan and stuff like this, they think of England and we want to go to England and they think they got the streets are paved in gold. That's not the case. So,
mm,
you've got that, but also what you have to remember, which is a key point, Brother Muttaqi. So, yeah, your assessment is correct. First point, right? There's
okay.
so many British in Spain. I can't remember how many, but they don't call it immigrants. They call them expats, right?
Right.
They don't call it immigrants, right? But they're
Mm,
living in Spain now, right? But the thing is, what you got to understand as well, like, we are talking about a capitalist society, right? Rich get richer, poor get
yeah.
poorer, right? It's in the books and it's in the reality. So the last in the UK, the last I can't remember how many years, 14 years I think of the Tory government, austerity and stuff like that.
Mm,
Bro, it's killed off communities. So even though you have, like, just say you have the government, then you have local communities, and within there you have like a council who they fund like initiatives in the society, in the community, whether it's youth centers or things like, or parks and
right.
stuff like this. There's no money, so they've basically packed up. So you've got places now where there's nothing for the youth to do other than maybe you're going to the life of crime and going to the life of drugs, right? So a large part of the country is in that situation where they are struggling. So many elderly die every year because they can't afford heating.
Mm,
This is the reality. So yeah, of course, and then throw into the mix, you always need someone to point at the blame. It's
right.
the brown man, the black man, the Muslim, and ultimately that's who they use as scapegoats. But this is something which is a societal issue. They don't have the concept of zakat. They don't have concept of the Islamic economic system, where the wealth is distributed in a way where, it's not usurped by the few, you know. They don't have this. So this is a man-made system. So you'll have man-made problems. And these man-made problems are not made by people who look like me. They're made by the system. They're made by the few who are killing it. When COVID happened, there are some people they killed it. The amount of millions and trillions they made of this
Yeah.
medicine and these masks and all these uh, you know what the vaccines. It was a big
Mhm.
business, you know. And I've seen this one picture where it's like a cartoon, and you got a guy sitting in the middle, and he looks like one of these capitalists anyway, right? And then you have a white man sitting on one side, and then you have a black man sitting on the other side, right? And so the white guy, the capitalist, he has a plate full of cookies, like a pyramid. It's full of cookies. Then you
Mhm.
have the white man, he has one cookie in his plate. Then you have the immigrant, he doesn't have any cookies in his plate. And there's a caption saying, the white guy is saying, the wealthy guy is saying to the poor white guy, you know, that immigrant wants your cookie. And that's just the way it is. People not
Mhm.
looking actually who is the one who is usurping everything. Why are the super capitalists the ones who are mega rich, whilst we are suffering to, we are struggling just to put food on the table. So that's just the way it is, bro. So yeah, if London wasn't in part of the UK, and London, just for your information, London in majority voted to remain in the EU. It was
Mhm.
the northern parts who were duped to think that their life was going to be made better because all these millions were going to the EU, right? In
Right.
fact, it's made things far worse. So they need a scapegoat. He just looks
Mhm.
like me and you, bro.
Yeah. Regarding your first question about migration, no, more Americans in general, not speaking about Muslim Americans specifically, but Americans in general, uh, it's a common theme now, or maybe it's just my YouTube algorithm feeding me the same thing, that the American century is starting to come to an end now. And every nation, every great nation has about a century of absolute dominance. The Great Britain had about a century of absolute dominance, give or take a couple of decades. The United States had about a century. Um, Even the Muslim world, from the time of basically Omar ibn Khattab up until roughly just before the end of the Umayyad Caliphate. It was a time of immense expansion by the Muslim world. Every nation has roughly about a century of greatness. Even the Ottoman Empire had really about a century when it was rapidly expanding, and then its expansion slowed down and then finally started to shrink. But roughly about a century is about all that these really powerful nation states can really maintain their dominance. I'm talking about absolute dominance, not just being alive, because they can live for much longer without necessarily dominating. So the American century is starting to come to an end. If we say it started in 1950 or really 1947, 1946, after the end of World War II, then we have about maybe 20 more years, if we go by that. But it could be a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, nonetheless. But we all see that the United States is not what it used to be. Even in my childhood, is not what it used to be. And many Americans, those who have the means, are at least entertaining the idea of moving to another country. My son,
When you're
well,
saying Americans, are you talking about white Americans? Or are you talking about people of color?
Americans in general, Americans in general are saying, I'll get to Muslim Americans in a moment, but Americans in general, especially younger Americans, millennials, Gen Z to a certain extent, Gen Z especially, they're starting to really talk about moving to other countries. Um, and that's more of a phenomenon than it's definitely more popular now than it was when I was at that same age. Now, as far as Muslims are concerned, throughout my life, we've always had Muslims talking about migrating to a Muslim world, to a Muslim country and trying to live a Muslim life. Many of them have gone, many have come back because they get there and it's not the same. And they come back or they run out of money or they go there without a plan and things don't quite work out,
Mhm.
and things like that. But I would say that I think it may be a little bit easier now with remote work becoming more popular. My son, who's in college right now, he's talking about he doesn't really want to stay in the United States. He wants to hopefully, inshallah, once he graduates, try to move overseas. And my wife and I were also saying the same thing, that once he graduates, we don't really have anything holding us here now. That's one we were talking about, maybe buying a house. Of course, buying a house generally requires riba, but there are Islamic banks here, or Islamic financial institutions that I don't know what kind of loopholes they have, but they found the loopholes around it. We were talking about doing that, but we sat down and discussed it, and and I really don't want to be tied to the United States. I don't want to have this 15, 30-year chain around my neck, chaining me to the United States. And I think I might want to, once we get enough capital saved up, I think I might want to visit somewhere, or move out of this country, move somewhere where, I don't have to read the ingredients to see if everything is pork or not. Pork in there. I want
to. But I think in terms of what you're saying, it's like a preference, right? It's like it's something which is like I would want to, but
right.
Since 9/11, right? Has there not been a case where, because of how Muslims were treated, and they were treated very bad in America, right? With all the spying and all that sort of stuff that came out. And even up until now, you have the Muslim ban, and it's very, very clear, who the sort of enemy is, who the other is, right? Has that not been a reason as well for Muslims? And maybe, like for example, there could be people also who, with your situation, is a bit different. This is what I mean, where you had people who came from the subcontinent or came from Muslim lands, and they, 50 years ago, and now you're talking about second, third generation, right? Where they're looking back to, maybe they're back to their roots, But anyway, the point I'm saying is that, has none of this idea of moving to a Muslim land been caused by, anti-Muslim sentiment on the ground?
I don't believe so, not yet. At this point, Muslims make up a much smaller percentage in the United States than in the UK. Generally speaking, you only find large concentrations of Muslim in the United States in the large cities, mostly along the coast, which are already kind of liberal. And so places like, of course, New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, DC, Houston, Dallas, parts of Florida, places along the coast that already have large population areas, that already tend to be kind of liberal already. So they have a large multi-ethnic communities within these cities. That's where most of the Muslims in the United States live. So that huge swath between California and New York, all those what they call flyover country, which is, I don't really use that term, but they mean flyover country because the only interesting parts are on the coast. That's what they say. So that there aren't too many Muslims comparatively. There are some, of course. There are large Muslim communities in Cleveland and I think another place. Cleveland, Detroit too. Detroit also, but there are there really aren't as many Muslims there in many parts of the United States. So people may have this vitriol about Sharia law, but 90% of these people will never see a Muslim in their life, or they'll see someone they won't even know they're Muslim because they're so ingrained in society or whatever. So yeah, we do. If you travel through like a small part of like Kentucky or Kansas or places like that, there's going to be a Muslim society there. Yes, of course, but it'll be fairly small, not very influential, definitely no kind of political influence. These are people who usually professors at the local university who came there. They might have maybe some sort of maybe a major hospital and attract some Muslim doctors and stuff there, right? Yeah, and they'll come there, they'll settle down, they have a little bit of money, they put together money to build a masjid or a local Islamic center, and it's about it. They're not trying to and they are going to essentially buy into the American story. And I've heard this before, that American Muslims tend to integrate much more into American society than Muslims in other countries. We don't have this thing, and I know this is probably just propaganda, the so-called no-go areas I started hearing recently. I know they had them in France. I know they spoke about them in France, but I'm hearing about them in the UK
it's
too.
bogus, bro. It's bogus.
Yeah, I thought it was probably bogus. I knew it was probably more propaganda, but there's nothing like that. The closest you might have is Philadelphia, and that's not really the same thing. Philadelphia has a large population of Muslims compared to other cities. It's still predominantly Christian, predominantly not Muslim. So, but because it has a large population of Muslims, Muslims have a disproportional impact on the culture of Philadelphia than in other parts of the United States. But generally speaking, and none of those places are no-go areas either. Anybody can go to any of those places. But yeah, we don't really have that. It's just that that brings us to the idea people are arguing about this whole thing about immigration or migrants into the United States. There are certain cities, like you know about the thing about New York City's migrant crisis right now, also Chicago to a certain extent. It's been fairly popular of late. Um, what they call sanctuary cities. Have you heard that term regarding the United States?
No, no, I haven't.
All right, a sanctuary city are certain cities, and all of them are up north, by the way, not along the border. These are cities that where the law enforcement and the government structure will not enforce immigration rules, and they're not going to ask immigrants or migrants to prove their citizenship or prove where they're from and things like that. However,
Why?
that
Why is that? Why is that?
to make it, it's a sanctuary city. It's a sanctuary for immigrants and migrants to go to. So they can
Really?
go, yeah, they can go there and basically not be harassed by the government regarding their origin. However, those are only a few cities like that. New York City is one of them. These are
But
really the
the
big,
whole of New York City.
yeah, all New York cities. New York City is one of them. Chicago is another. These are big cities. They're not going to be small cities. So places like Texas, which does have a lot of immigration coming in from Mexico, but it's often people from South America and parts of Central America entering the United States through Mexico, not necessarily Mexicans themselves, but beyond that, Texas gets a lot of immigrants. And so recently, the past couple of years, they started taking these immigrants, rounding them up, because Texas does not have that law. They will round up anybody they please, put them on buses and shipping them up to New York City and Chicago to these sanctuary cities and say, well, you want these guys, here you are, in a way of saying that, or flying them there. And it has become a financial burden on New York. So I can speak, I'm from New York, so I can speak about that a little bit more than Chicago per se. And at least that's the way it's portrayed in the news. I can say that. While I went to New York recently, I didn't really see it. I didn't really see this big migration problem, but I don't know. Maybe if I lived there, if I was there for a long time, I might have felt it more. But from what I'm seeing on the news, and I will admit it is coming from the media, once they ship them to these cities, the city government is now obligated to take care of them, give them food, give them shelter, give them medical care. If they have children, take care of the children. And this has come, and it has become a political disaster for the mayor of New York and other people in New York City who have to now. People are complaining, we have homeless Americans on the street, and you're giving debit cards. I know it sounds familiar, right? I know you're giving debit cards to these undocumented immigrants, undocumented migrants, however they want to call them. And so that's the thing that's happening with these sanctuary cities. Now, my point I was trying to make is that people who are against immigration, I'm not against immigration. I don't like the idea of sanctuary cities. I think they probably should tweak that a little bit to make it, because we do need immigration. But I can understand every nation has a right to limit who they let in. And the United States is not so much of a colonizer, so at least in the past. It has its own imperial ambitions. It had its own imperialism, but not the same way as the UK and France and Spain, Italy to a certain extent as well, Germany as well. But it doesn't have the same history, but we do need immigration so you just can't close the borders to everybody. But I do understand having some control. Nations do have to control who they let in and who they let out. So I'm not really against that per se, but this idea that people are in Iowa or Idaho or Kansas are complaining about immigrants. Nobody's going to Kansas or Iowa. They're going to New York City or Texas. So I don't know why people in these states, and these are people who are hopping on the MAGA bandwagon, people who don't really have a migrant crisis. Texas, Florida, yes, they definitely do.
Bro, that's similar. I mean, even in places like Hungary, the I can't remember the last elections they had there, but the guy who won the elections, one of his main election promises were keeping Muslims out and immigrants out, but they have like 0.00 something immigrants
Right.
or Muslims there, right? But at the same time, it's propaganda. So when you talk about make America great, and the way you showed how Muslims are pretty insignificant in terms of population and stuff like that in the US. However, over the last 20 years or so, the effort to demonize and use these people in your election propaganda just to win,
Mhm.
it doesn't weigh up. It's like, wait a minute, you're hating these people, but they're not really a problem. Like you're
Right.
saying, the people who are complaining about immigration, they probably never seen a Muslim.
Exactly. It's not so during the I remember in the early 2000s and the 2000 aughts. So they had this thing where the big thing about Sharia law in the United States. And at the time, I was living in Birmingham, Alabama, which has it does have a Muslim society, a Muslim organization, the Birmingham Islamic Society. I'm sorry, I know you guys say Birmingham. I'm saying it's the Birmingham in Alabama, by the way. I got to remember that. I know ours is named after yours, but
Of
you know what I
course, of
mean.
course.
Okay. But Birmingham, Alabama, it does have a Muslim organization, but Alabama is not a large state, population-wise, large in land, but population-wise, it's probably in the lower third of the United States population-wise. It has one sort of major city, but that's not even really considered a major city. It doesn't have a significant Muslim population to warrant any sort of problems. Yet I was invited to one of its to um, University, no, Alabama University, to give a talk there. This is years ago, so this is back in 2010. This is a long time ago. To give a talk about Islam in America, and one of the first questions they asked me was about Sharia, and it's like so preposterous that they are bringing up Sharia in a place like Alabama with less than 100,000 Muslims. Alabama has probably about 6 million people, less than 100,000 Muslims in the entire state, if even that. I'll probably put it closer to maybe about 70 to 80,000 maybe.
Yeah,
And they're
exactly.
talking about it makes no sense. It's just
Have
ridiculous.
you seen that little clip from that comedian? What's his actual name? But he played the role of Ali G. Um,
Yeah, yeah. The guy who played in
Sasha, what's the name?
I know you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Um
there's one
mhm.
where he's like, I don't know, it's some southern state or
Sasha Baron Cohen or something. Sasha
that's
Cohen
right,
Baron
that's
something.
right, yeah. And
Okay.
he's like, I'll send you afterwards if you haven't seen it. And he's like, he's dressed up and he's in some like I don't know where in America. Like it just sounds like one of these places where they probably don't even like black people. And he's talking about, oh, we're going to be bringing, we're going to be investing heavily in your community, and you're gonna have millions coming in, and everyone's excited. And he announces the plans for a brand new mosque, right? And you should see their reaction. It's so funny, like.
Mhm.
And I would argue that a lot of America is like that, where basically they hate something which they have had no access to.
Right.
They've not met anyone, but it's just the way it is. I think what's important as well is to remember, and this was something I was thinking about in during the what happened in the UK, that something people don't forget is the disease of nationalism, the disease of concepts and bonds like patriotism, because ultimately, when you Islam obviously prohibits nationalism. We know this asabiya,
Mhm.
patriotism,
Right.
and we see how when humans believe in nationalism, ultimately racism, and this is not even talking about just countries in the West. Any nation state will have bigotry and racism against the other, purely because it feels like it's all about a certain type of people and they're number one, and their needs come first, etc., etc. So already what you're doing is you're marginalizing other people and you're giving them less importance. So, you know, in places like the West, this is something which is a product of capitalism. It's a product of just the concept of nationalism. And we see this, that even if, for example, and actually what you see is that the nationalistic bond and the patriotic bond, why it's also a weak bond, is because it only really comes to play and unites people when there's a threat. When that
Mhm.
threat goes, that bond has no connection now, right? So you'll have people who, if the immigrants left, then they would find something to fight each other. Like you're Northerners and we're Southerners, and it doesn't matter about color. It's, it's this idea that there always has to be the other, and that we are better than everyone else. So, something Malcolm X said many, many years ago, that the problem of racism in the United States, the solution is Islam. And when you look at what's happening in the UK, and you were talking about these people who have no never interacted with a Muslim or know anything about Islam, but they have these preconceived notions about what Islam and Sharia law is, and don't have an idea. It's because of the mindset that they have. And a person isn't born racist, right? A person isn't born a bigot. Racism is something which is a thought, is an erroneous thought that people carry, right? But it can be removed and replaced with a better thought. And that better thought is Islam, because we saw it at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith that, a black man is not superior to a white man, you know, a white man is not superior to a black man, an Arab is not superior to a non-Arab, and vice versa, you know.
Right.
And I think that's why it's important during these times that when we are interacting with people, is, making it clear that ultimately, if you look at people through the lens of how they look and their color and what they believe in, then you're always going to find an enemy, right? You're always going to be used. Those people that are locked up now, they're in prison now. They were going about their business. They got caught up in a riot, you know. And here, what you don't have people who are criminals. You have people who are just normal people. I don't even think they are built for prisons, right? The prison life. But now they're finding themselves doing hard time, right? So it's just something which it goes to show really that, in times like this, it's still important for Muslims to always hold the higher ground, right? Not to act in a way where it can be used to show them as being the same as the rioters and the looters, you
Right.
know. Even though the media has tried to do that, Asian gangs came out, and they've tried
Yeah.
to do that, you know. But the
Well,
normal people are not buying it, and there's a big difference. But I think Muslims need to be vigilant about not falling into the stereotype that's been pushed for them, and I think we need to be extra careful about that.
and uh, and that actually brings. I know the last thing I want to say is that I meant to say this earlier when we were talking about the Islamophobia in the United States. After there was a period of time where it was heightened Islamophobia. Of course, we know it definitely after 9/11, but even in the early years of Barack Obama, by that time it's starting to simmer down, but it ticked back up after the Fort Hood shootings. That was when can't remember the guy's name. He was a soldier. He was Muslim.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
he was
Hassan,
influenced by
Hassan, his
some
name is Hassan something.
yeah, he was influenced supposedly by Anwar al-Awlaki. I don't know, remember that.
I don't believe that.
And I don't, well, they say that they try to pull that up and yeah, they try to to create that narrative because he was he communicated with Anwar al-Awlaki a few times, and after the deed was done, Anwar al-Awlaki praised him, or not necessarily praised him, but justified what he did. I'll put it like that. He justified the shooting. But that's not him. After that, there was an immediate uptick in Islamophobia, and I was living in Alabama at that time. And from that point on, up until maybe about 2016 or so, 2017, maybe around that, it kind of simmered down by 2017. So this is about, anyway, I can't remember how, I'm getting a little confused in dates, but I do know that there was a time in the late 2000 teens, 2017, 2018 or so, when this armed group of far right wingers, now this Georgia is a constitutional carry state, which means that anyone over the age of 18 can walk around legally with a gun. People under the age of 21 can't have handguns. They can't have pistols, but they could walk around with some with some machine guns. The craziest thing, I took my son at the time he was 18 years old. I took him to a local shooting range, and I have my gun, which is just a regular handgun, but he couldn't use my gun. But they gave him this big old machine gun he could use because that was legal. He was good with it. I give him that though. He was hitting the mark. But it was
And what's the age limit on, like, for drinking alcohol and stuff like that, buying alcohol?
it's still 21. 20,
21. So you
21.
can have a machine gun, you
Yeah.
can't drink.
Right, yeah, I guess the thinking is that you can't hide a machine gun in your book bag, but you can hide a pistol in your book bag. So I guess that's the thinking of it. But
Yeah, no, no, it is because you can conceal a handgun.
yeah, it was so silly that you can't use that tiny gun. But then they gave him this big old machine with a scope on it, and so here you go, son. It's great. Now, he was good with it, though. I'll give him that. But anyway, that's either here nor there. The point is, these armed guys came to the largest masjid in Atlanta. It's a Masjid al Furuq. It's the largest masjid in downtown Atlanta or midtown Atlanta, really. Um, and they were there protesting that, and we all knew they were going to come. And there was a certain cadre, certain Muslims within the community was like, well, let's go with our guns over there and protest against them. And the administration of the masjid asked the Muslims who were saying, let's go down there and protest as well with their guns, saying, no, please don't come. We'll let the law enforcement. I understand their point because anything bad happens is going to really not look good. Ultimately, it's about maybe 4 or 5 people showed up. 4 or 5 of the right wing guys showed up with their guns. The police were there. They walked around the hot sun for a couple of for a few hours, talking about no Sharia law. Then they left, and it never happened again after that. It was completely. Well, I would say that, and this is the last thing is that Masaj after the massacre in New Zealand a couple of years back. I think that was in 2019. I think after that, many of the massages here have started having armed guards. Some of them have already had concealed armed guards. I know some of them. I know certain of them that had guards with concealed, had security with concealed arms, but you'll see now a lot more with security walking around with open submachine guns and AR-15s openly, just as show of force. And these are not high security. These are Muslims with their guns, and we still have police officers there too, but they're mostly just to control traffic. But that's something that we've had to do, and I think we should have done that earlier. But I'm glad we actually got the message after New Zealand, because ultimately we have to take care of ourselves as well. That's the only thing I want to add to that is that I hope it doesn't get to the point where we have these large anti-Muslim protests in the United States. But the thing is that we carry guns too. It's not like they can just attack us willy-nilly. I mean, there may be more of them than us, but we can defend ourselves. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, inshallah.
No, no,
Inshallah will come to
alhamdulillah.
that. But again,
To be honest with you, the same, just to add to that as well is we had the same sort of like discussions going on here where you did have some imams who were telling people not to come out, leave it to the police,
right.
or you had some who were saying things like, if you do come out, then don't say Allahu Akbar and stuff like this. So,
Mhm.
you know, Alhamdulillah, that didn't resonate with the people because the people had seen how when these looters went into areas, they were attacking mosques, they were attacking businesses. So the Muslims came out in force. However, what was great was that, you know, um, in most places they came out in defense. So, if you come into this area and you cause trouble, then don't think we're just going to take it lying down. However, some
Right.
guys were even like pacifists, man, like imams are like really giving a pacifist message, like just don't even come out. But,
Mm.
at the end of the day, you need to you need to protect. And look, Sharia dictates that, but even the law of the country says you
Yeah.
can protect yourself. So why wouldn't you? Um, so it was a message which was important for Muslims to show unity because in my local area, for example, they never turned up twice. However, Muslims did, and it was just a good opportunity to meet people I hadn't seen for a while, and and it showed that there were
Yeah.
Muslims there who were from different masajid and different opinions, but they were there together you know and then you even
Mhm.
had like the wider non-Muslim community were there together, people
Mhm.
against racism and stuff like this. And even though I feel like maybe there was an element where they had said they're going to turn up and they didn't, with the hope that the Muslim youth just kick off with the police anyway because they want to show the Muslims in the same light, because they've not been able to do that with the pro-Palestine marchers. Recently, they've been trying to say that the BLM marches were the same, but people are saying no, they weren't. This was pure looting and pure rioting, right? Obviously,
Mhm.
you're gonna have trouble here and there anywhere when you get so many people together. But they're trying to show how, it wasn't just the English patriots who were acting like this. Other people do, and they've not done that. So the Muslims were there. The police were out there. They weren't getting a beating. They weren't getting bricks thrown at them and stones thrown at them like they were by the English patriots. So that was good in that respect. But what was important is the Muslims did come out to show that, we're peaceful people, but if you want trouble,
Mhm.
then we ain't gonna take it lying down. And I think that was an important message, because then at the end of the day, they will think twice as well. Then, if they want to
Exactly.
come into
Yeah.
your community, attack the sisters, and break the shops of the windows, loot the shops, attack the masajid, you shouldn't leave that to the police, because the police ain't really going to do um, too much of a job, because again, because of austerity and because of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, the police force has taken a battering in terms of the personnel, in terms of how many police officers have been laid off work over the last decades, you know, and this has a bearing. And then, to be honest with you, the police force is institutionally racist anyway, and this is a proven fact. So,
Yeah.
are they really going to protect your masjid and your sisters and your families the way you can, which actually the law allows you to? Why would you hide in your homes then?
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, subhanAllah, brother Muttaqi, man, it was a really good catch up. And I think, we said we are going to do these regular, and I think we should do.
Mhm.
But before I end, bro,
Yep.
what's happening with the Islamic History podcast? What you working on? What should people be looking
Mhm.
forward to?
I'm trying to get out the next season, which should be season 10, is going to wrap up the Mughal Empire, which will display some of the brutality of the British government, because the Mughal Empire ends with the Sepoy uprising, I think in 1850,
1857.
yeah, 1857. It really ends with that. And what the British did to Delhi, I believe, it was
Did,
just
did
about
you
as
get
bad
that
as
book? Did you get that book I recommended to you?
The Last Mughal
The
or
Last
something.
Mughal
Yeah, I do have it.
by
Yeah, yeah. I
William
didn't know you.
Dalrymple.
Okay, you recommend? I know you recommend it. I know I have it in my. I know I have it in my
But
Kindle, and I was.
this is the one written by William
Yeah,
Dalrymple,
yeah,
right?
that's it. I started reading. I just haven't finished it yet because
Yeah, yeah.
that's going to be towards the end of the season. I just finished Nadir Shah's, well, researching, I should say. I just finished researching on Nadir Shah's invasion of Delhi, and I don't know which was worse, his or the British, but they're both pretty bad. I'm still doing the research. I research an entire season and then try to put out all at once, because it's hard to research in between one week after the next. So I try to do it all at once, and it's slow going right now. It is taking a much longer than I expected. But that's the thing. I'm working through. I think I've caught up to the research about episode 4. Well, the episode I just finished was Nadir Shah's invasion of Delhi, when the Persian Empire, or the Safavid Empire, led by Nadir Shah, invaded Delhi, killed a bunch of people, walked off with the Kohinoor diamond, and I think also the Peacock throne. And that was a Mughal Empire was already declining, but it really went to free fall after that. It just completely fell apart after that. But that's currently what I'm also working on. On the alternate side, I have a paid podcast that's how I run the show. That's how I get the money to fund the show, is by having a paid series. The paid series is really going through the Khilafat. And so I've just started the beginnings of the Abbasid conspiracy in the Umayyad, and within the Umayyad dynasty. So it's a two-tier story discussing the politics and the actions of the Umayyads, while also discussing this conspiracy, the Abbasiya conspiracy happening below the surface that the Umayyads are not quite aware of. It's still a good 20 or 30 years or so before the actual revolution begins on the Abbasids. But it's really interesting reading into how all these things are connected to things that happened way before, to the attempted Khilafat of Ibn Zubair, which is of course connected to Yazid ibn Muawiyah and the massacre at Karbala, which is of course connected to Ali and then Uthman and then to the four righteous caliphs in general. It's an interesting story. I feel like I'm kind of doing my own version of the MCU, where you have to where something happens in one movie, 10 years ago, they go out and take that and make it into a new movie now. It's really like that. I'm reading things now where I got to go back and say, oh, so this is connected to that, and I got to go back and read what I did all the way back so many years ago and say, oh, that's what, and then bring it back, and it's really interesting, and I got a lot more to do on that. So, um, that will eventually branch off into, of course, the downfall of the Umayyads, the Muslim conquest of Spain, which I've already done, of Iberia, but also how the Umayyad Khilafate continued to live in Spain or in Iberia after the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads in Damascus. But yeah, so it's interesting. I just wish I had multiple brains to do more work at one time. It's just not enough. There's not enough time to research and then put together stories. But inshallah, it's slow going, but I think inshallah will be exciting when those people who love history and politics and warfare, which I know I probably should do a little bit less of, but the politics and the warfare is fun and exciting. So,
On that note, brother Muttaqi, Jazakallah khair for
welcome.
joining. It took a little while to get this going, but like I said, inshallah, we'll try doing something more regular.
Inshallah.
And I do encourage people to, leave a comment and like the video and share it with your family and friends, inshallah ta'ala. And on that note, inshallah, until the next one, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.